Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I have with me Judy Cho, who is also known on social media as Nutrition with Judy. Judy is a nutritional therapy practitioner, has a degree in psychology and communications, and is the author of Carnivore Cure, which will be releasing next week on December 2nd. In her clinical practice, she focuses on treating the root cause and not just the symptoms to help her clients heal. She is also a mom of two boys who she nourishes with a low-carb, high-fat diet. And Judy is truly passionate about helping people improve their health and debunking misinformation. And I know her passion will shine through in our interview today. So welcome to the channel, Judy.
Thank you so much for having me, Kate.
I'm so excited to talk to you today. So why don't you start off by telling my followers a bit more about your story, how you came across the carnivore diet, how long you've been eating the carnivore diet.
Sure. Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Judy Cho. And for those of you that don't know me, I go by Nutrition with Judy. I have a private practice in Austin, Texas, and I also see clients kind of worldwide virtually. And we really just get to root cause healing. And a lot of that is by using a meat-based diet and then supporting gut health. I personally have been doing carnivore now for probably a little over 2.5 years. I was doing keto for about a year, and I noticed that a lot of my kind of binge tendencies went away a lot with a keto diet. I was a lot more nourished, but I think the allotment of a certain amount of carbohydrates on certain days, the sweeteners and stuff, those things that would help me kind of get through a day, on harder days, it would kind of get me back to eating sugar. And so, I saw this thing, people were like, why don't you try a meat-based diet? I thought it was kind of crazy. But, I had this period where I knew I was going to be going through really stressful times. And I have a tendency, I had a eating disorder. And so I knew I had a tendency that if I was really stressed, I would turn to food. And so I did not want that to happen. And so I said, okay, fine. As this stressful period's coming in my life, let me just try this crazy meat-based diet. And then it stuck. I've been carnivore for 2.5 years now, and never depressed. I have a lot more even moods, and I don't go through, I think the first year it was tough to kind of give up all sugars, sweeteners, that type of thing. But now I don't even look at it as food. And so I don't really struggle. And so, yeah, it's been a huge blessing. And now I'm just kind of giving back.
Yeah. So your book, just Carnivore Cure, is coming out next week. What made you want to write this book?
Yeah. So when I first started carnivore, and I'm sure you know this, but we didn't see a lot of graphics out there. So it's like, well, there's so much for keto. Why isn't there like how much we can eat? How do we get started? What if we have loose stools, electrolytes, all these things? When we are now just eating meat, we have to, for example, eat more meat than if you were on a keto diet. And there wasn't just a lot of succinct information in one place. And so I started doing graphics because I wanted it for myself, and I shared it on Instagram, and it was, people enjoyed it. And then I just realized, okay, so content plus a little bit of graphics is really visually helpful for people to learn. And then over time, as I kept doing social media, and honestly, I did it first for accountability purposes for myself. But it just kind of took a life of its own, fell in love with nutrition, went back to school, got my nutritional therapy certification. And now it's just, I started getting the same questions over and over. And so people would ask me about fiber, vitamin C, antioxidants, and just what do you think about the environment? All these things. And then it's just, I kept repeating the same stuff over. And I just felt like it would be wonderful if there was just one place that you can just get all your information, whether it's, the concerns about, is it safe to eat, non-grass-fed meat? Is it okay for the environment, right, to be a meat-based eater? What about all these other missing or possibly missing nutrients? Like, how do you do that? How do you deal with the social? Everything you could think of. And so I really just wanted kind of a one-stop resource. And that's why I created Carnivore Cure. The other thing is I work with a lot of clients that start meat-based because they are having an autoimmune disorder, or they're just really sick. Their gut health is so messed up that it's not about like, I just want to maximize longevity or health or this and that, but it's just, hey, if I eat an apple, I will get really sick.
Yeah.
And so I noticed that there are a lot of elimination diets where I mean, there's no elimination diet where there's all plant foods are removed, but there are so many different types of elimination diets, right? Whether it's Whole30, AIP, GAPS diet, autoimmune paleo, all these diets remove some, but they don't remove everything, right? Even
Yep.
Dr. Gundry removes lectins, but you know, what if we just removed all plants and we started a baseline of health, and then you can then reintroduce as needed? And that's where I think Carnivore Cure was kind of created, where it can be an elimination protocol. And I say ultimate because really it starts with certain meats that tend to not have reactions for most people, even if they're really sick. And then there's a process of even introducing other types of meats.
Yeah. So is there any group of people in particular that your book is aimed at? Is it specifically for people with autoimmune conditions or people who are already eating a carnivore diet? Will this benefit them as well?
Yeah, so my clientele is pretty much all meat based. Some of them are more keto, but they're very heavily meat based. And I guess typically the majority of the people that I work with, they have metabolic disease or they can't sleep through the night. You know, carnivore was working for them in the beginning, but over time it just wasn't working. So it's a lot of fine tuning, right? So this whole meat kind of heals everything is not true for my clients, at least. So, and a lot of them again had metabolic disease, hormonal issues. And so it's kind of healing that. And that's in my practice. And then I used a lot of that information and then just information from social media as to common questions, right? So there's an FAQ of common questions that are asked, like, how much do I eat in a day? What do I eat? Macros, right? So how much fat to protein, these types of things. And so really, if you want to, and I really say that this book is for everyone, and I call it a reference because one, it's really big. So I don't expect somebody to read the book like in 2 days and just kind of absorb everything. It's really of, here's all these topics I get into. Obviously, certain topics I get really into, like the concern about cholesterol with cardiovascular risk. But in other areas, you know, I cite studies that you can look further into. But if you are brand new to carnivore, there's definitely a lot of information in there that you can use. And then for areas that are like, oh, I don't even know if I'm going to have that kind of issue, you could kind of skip through it. And then if you do have issues, you can come back and fine tune. And then for people that have been doing carnivore, let's say they're not sleeping through the night still, or if they have their meal, they're now a little tired after, or maybe they want to reintroduce plants, there are those options as well. There's ways that you can kind of fine tune the diet and get your own personalized carnivore. And then there's the elimination part, right? So if you are really sick and you want to try the elimination diet and start with just like ruminant meats with no dairy and no eggs, and just stick with like clean water and meat broth instead of bone broth, because if you're really severely gut damaged, you probably can't tolerate bone broth. So there's also elimination protocol. And then there's a reintroduction of meats initially that you may not have been tolerant to. And then if you want to include plants, then kind of like based on the research I did, what plants would probably be the safest to reintroduce first.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about carnivore being the ultimate elimination diet. Do you think that carnivore is suitable for everyone long term? Do you think there's benefits from some people just doing it for a shorter period of time, maybe to break through a plateau, or once they've healed a bit?
Yeah. So I think carnivore or a meat-based diet is just very nutrient dense. It's very bioavailable, meaning that even if you have the worst gut disease, you will probably be able to get more of the nutrients out of meat than any other plant-based food. And so with that said, I think that most people, or I would say if everyone really wanted to and they found their personalized carnivore, they could do it long term. Now, does everyone need to do it long term? I don't think so. So if you, and I think most people, right, they come to carnivore because something wasn't working, or they were fed up with the medication they were given, or just that they still have lingering symptoms and they don't want to take more medication or whatever it is. And so then it's just, we're fed up. And so we're willing to give up everything else but meat to see how much we can heal from these amazing anecdotal stories. And then we try it and we notice, oh my gosh, a lot of it is true, right? So the thing is, after a certain point, if we want to reintroduce foods, I think that's a healthy approach, because if you think about it, it's not about finding the foods that kind of band-aid any symptoms, but it's trying to find resiliency. So if I want to eat some olives or some vegetables or whatever it is, and then I don't really react where I have to be bedridden, then that's a good sign, right? So in those instances, I think it's good to just try, right? So let's say I go to France and, you know, they're known for their baguettes. If I wanted to eat a little bit of the bread, and I know it's grains and it's not ideal, but still, let's just say, I would like to think that I have the flexibility to try it instead of fearing, oh my gosh, if I eat that, I'm going to be in my hotel room, like keeled over, right? Like that's where I think ideal is that if you want to stay meat-based most of your days, because you just feel the best that way, totally get it. That's me. But if there are some days where you just, you know, are out with friends, or it's just a special occasion or whatever it is, and you're not using it as like a eating disorder, then I think it's great. I think it's great to just introduce other things to see, you know, what are you tolerant to? What is your body resilient to, right? Because that is true health, is being able to be flexible.
Yeah. And it's all about the big picture too. You don't want to be focusing on your diet all the time and having to worry when you're going out and things like that. Yeah. Do you think there is anyone who wouldn't benefit from a meat-based diet?
Yeah, I thought about this, and actually I first used to think there was no one, but now I know that there actually is a small group. So there are some people that have SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and then they have more intolerance to sulfur. And the thing is, there are a lot of meat-based dieters that are, there is a lot of meat and especially eggs, and they're very high in sulfur. So for these people, they have to, at first, while they're healing their gut, they have to eat a kind of reduced amount of sulfur. But the thing is, you can't eat low sulfur for the rest of your life, because you need sulfur to even create glutathione, which, you know, cleanses the body or detoxes the body. So for those people, they may have to minimize their meats and eat certain kinds of meats to have the least amount of sulfur, like no eggs for sure. But they could probably still do it, but maybe those would be, I guess, the special group that maybe could eat a little less meat. But other than that, no, I think everyone could do it.
Yeah, so it's only short term that they might not be able to tolerate as much meat. Yeah. Okay. I don't think you mentioned this before, but you were a vegetarian for 10 years before going keto. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, it was 12 years, but yeah.
12 years. Oh, sorry. Was it difficult for you when you first decided to introduce meat back in? And yeah, what did that look like? What kind of was the turning point when you decided you wanted to add some of these foods back in?
Yeah, so I always had fish on occasion. It wasn't often though. And it was like canned tuna or, you know, a little bit of salmon. So it wasn't the healthiest and it wasn't too often. But so when I went keto, I was actually plant-based keto. So I would have a ton of olive oil, coconut oil, you know, MCT oils, and those like buttery coffees. And I noticed over time I wasn't as satiated. So, you know, I would feel full off the coffee, off the like the fats, but I wanted meat. I think it was like the spinach wasn't doing it or the cauliflower wasn't doing it. And then, yeah, I don't know. I think one day I was telling my husband, I think I want to eat meat again. And he had never seen me eat meat. And we were together for, you know, like 5+ years. And so he was a little bit in shock. Anyway, so I reintroduced it. My first meal, I felt really sick. Even though I was adding fat back. Yeah, I had a beef patty and I just remember that I thought I was going to throw up. But yeah, and it was pretty wild. But after like 1 or 2 more attempts, then it just became normal. So I don't know if it's because I was already eating keto with a lot of fat. And so I was already acclimated to that amount of fat, but it was just 1 or 2 meals of just feeling not so well. And then it was like, oh, I never didn't eat meat, you know? So it was like, yeah. And then eventually I basically went carnivore, and that was really shocking for my husband. But, you know, he says I'm a totally different person now, in terms of mood, emotions, just being there. And so he's now fully supportive. He wasn't when I first started, but I think he just sees, like he's a believer in that meat heal. So
that's awesome. Were there any mental barriers when you first decided you wanted to eat meat, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I went to Berkeley, so another, like, all of this very, very plant-based, very super friendly. Like around Berkeley, there are so many salad shops, and you know, when I turned plant-based, I was applauded for it. All my friends were like, oh, you're living such a healthy life now, and you look so great. And so there was this kind of stigma of like, I'm doing good for the world and I'm doing good for my health, and I'm so strong and strong-willed. And so when I was, you know, going to take off that kind of hat and I'm no longer pescatarian or, you know, plant-based, there was this stigma of, well, like, what about the animals now? Because I started researching more about the animals and their treatment when I was plant-based, when that wasn't the original reason I went plant-based. And so there was definitely, well, this was mine for 12 years and now I have to say, no, now I actually am going to eat meat. But I knew for my health that it was worth it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it definitely was hard. I'm not going to lie, just to kind of, it's funny, but we definitely hold on to identities. And so if you are kind of, I guess, pinpointed as a certain type of person or a certain type of being, and then you no longer are, it's really hard to kind of give up. And so I remember thinking, oh, you know, plant-based is so good for you. And this is before I knew a lot about the carnivore diet. And, but, you know, I thought it was still worth me trying, because I felt like I healed so much on keto. And if I just went carnivore, then maybe I could heal all the way. And it did. And I think for that reason, it was so worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I get a lot of messages from people who are plant-based and they want to start eating meat again for their health, but they really struggle with, I guess it's the identity and just the idea of eating animals again. Do you have any advice for people like that?
Yeah. So one thing I bring up in the book is something called 𝗖𝗟𝗜𝗖𝗢, which I learned from 𝗖𝗟𝗜𝗙 Carnivore Yogi, but it's basically the practice of like, do no harm. Right. And so the thought is that, you know, a lot of plant-based vegans are very, let's do no harm to animals and let's do good in this world. Right. And so, and that's great, right? That's a very good philosophy, but then we should also think that we should do no harm to ourselves. Right. So if we are eating plant-based, and so we allow the animals to be supported or not, you know, treated unfairly or unkind, but we treat ourselves like we malnourish ourselves with plant-based foods, then are we doing 𝗖𝗟𝗜𝗖𝗍 for ourselves? And if we want to take care of our children and our generations to come, we need to nourish ourselves. And also, if we are going to give back when we die, and then we will be good soil for the cows to then eat. And then it's like this, you know, the circle of life, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to be super unhealthy and then be mineral deficient and then be that in the soils, if, you know, you want to think of it that way. I really think it's just, if you are going from or plant-based to then trying to eat meat, then just get to know your farmer and get to know these farms where they do regenerative agriculture, where they do treat their animals kindly. As an example, my farmer, we've been driving to him for 6 years now, getting raw goat's milk. And he now is older and he's like, we can no longer take care of our goat herd. And so there's, I don't know, 50 of them. And so he's like, we need to sell them off, but we don't want them to just get auctioned off. We love these as our own children. And so we are going to find homes individually for every single one. And so until the day that we know that every single one's in a good home, we're going to keep them until that day. And that was so beautiful to read from our farmer, who's telling us that, you know, they're going to slowly kind of let go of the milk supply. But that's a farmer I know that loves and takes care of his animals, right? So find farmers like that, and then ones that are treating their animals well, so that you don't feel bad that, you know, you are eating this animal then that has been treated well, and that, you know, one day you will again be the soil for them to eat the grass. So that's like one of the biggest things. And then in terms of climate, the earth, it's just not true. Like, and you could read my book. I talk through so much of, I mean, we just went through COVID and we always said the cows are, you know, causing so much methane and CO2 and all that. And it's just, when we all went under lockdown, the cows were still out and the earth got so clean. So let's just kind of throw that away, right? It's just not true. And, you know, we really just need to nourish our bodies. I talk about the Pottinger cat studies where this guy, this doctor, he fed cats and was feeding them a nutrient poor diet. And every generation they got worse and worse. And by the 4th generation, they died out, right? So you want to practice 𝗖𝗟𝗜𝗖𝗍 to your kids. If you love those animals as much, then you should love your kids. And you don't want to malnourish them. And you know, it's just also understanding why meat is more nutrient dense and bioavailable than plants, right? So I mean, I do believe that our generations are getting sicker and sicker. And if we were to just go back to eating a lot more meat-based, I think we can heal a lot of that.
Yeah, 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 that's really helpful. To finish off, I want to ask you, what are the 5 worst plant foods that you think everyone should eliminate completely? And what do you think the best 5 plant foods are that most people can tolerate?
Sure. So, you know, every plant has anti-nutrients. So if we were to think of every single plant anti-nutrient, then there'd probably be no plant we can eat. So I'll just kind of leave that disclaimer out there. But if we were to consider kind of the most toxic foods, I think really the plants are like seeds, nuts, grains, processed foods, artificial food colorings, and probably seed oils. And primarily those were picked because they have a lot more anti-nutrients. They wreck your gut, and your gut is kind of root cause of your health. 70 to 80% of your immune system is there. Your 70 to 80% of your gut is your small intestine absorbs your nutrients. And so if that is impaired, which lectins, phytates, maybe sometimes oxalates, but those are in the nuts and seeds and grains, they will then damage your gut. And then how can you have good health when you're eating those kinds of foods? Seed oils are really toxic. They're inflammatory. They are made from plants that are toxic to humans, like canola is made from rapeseed. And so you don't want to be eating that. As soon as you eat it, it causes your cells to kind of go crazy, and it's just causing inflammation. And that's the root cause of a lot of modern day disease. So you don't want to be eating that. And then I have sections in the book that talk about the artificial food coloring, how it's so toxic, how, you know, some kids with autism, if they have like red dye, they start acting hyperactive. And it's, you know, there is a red food coloring that the FDA has been trying so hard to, I guess, ban. And for makeup and all skincare, they've gotten it approved, but then it's still illegal in foods.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, so we can't have it go through our skin, but we can use hand sanitizer, right? But we can still ingest it. So it just shows that there's all these kind of bureaucracies, politics that make things really hard. Because one of the arguments the food industry said is, no one is going to want to eat a maraschino cherry that's brown, right? So that's why they use that food dye. And I get it to an extent, because we buy with our eyes more than our stomach. But you know, there's so many studies that show at a certain amount of coloring, it's toxic for kids, toxic for adults. And now we are consuming way more than that. And especially kids, it's neurotoxin. And I talk deeply about that. So I think any food coloring should not be consumed. And that is basically almost all candies, most like cookies and cupcakes, anything with coloring in it usually has food dye. And then and I think, so those are the big ones. So processed food, it's because, again, the inflammatory seed oils. And in my book, I have 10, I guess, the safer foods. And the reason I picked it, it was considering food plants that were in different elimination diets. If it had oxalates, lectins, and phytates, which I think are some of the worst anti-nutrients, because you can't really cook them down, versus like 𝗖𝗟𝗏𝗖𝗍𝗓𝗏, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, but you can kind of boil that 50% down based on studies. And so the ones I picked, and they're really boring plants, sorry, but they're like, what is it? Lettuce, cabbage, chives, bok choy, and arugula. And they're like no to low in histamines, very low or low in oxalates, low to moderate in salicylates, low in or no in phytates, no to low in lectins. And then they're all permitted on the AIP, so the autoimmune paleo, FODMAP diets, which is gut focused. And so, and then there's just more logic in the book as to why I picked those. But I took out fruits because they all have a little bit of salicylates. And then if you are metabolically struggling, so if you had, you know, diabetes or you're pre-diabetic, probably fruit is not the first thing you want to include.
And most people are.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on my channel, Judy. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so my book is coming out, like you said, on December 2nd. It is on Amazon, the ebooks on Amazon right now for pre-sale. My book Right now, you can get the paperback on carnivorecure.com. And then on December 2nd, both of them will be on Amazon. And I think you could still get it on carnivorecure.com. If you buy it during pre-sale, you can get bonuses. So definitely sign up then. As for me, you can find me at nutritionwithjudy.com. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And I write blog posts, and I also share them on Medium as well.
Perfect. Okay, well.